everyone. Welcome back to a special series of TEXTing IRL, Ideas for Real Life, where we examine Jewish issues through the lens of classical and modern Torah texts. I'm your host, Elana Stein Hain, and we're recording on July 24th, 2025. If you'd like to follow along in the show notes with our texts, please do so. TEXTing is sponsored by the Walder Charitable Fund and Micah Philanthropies. So in this special series of TEXTing, we are looking at challenges facing North American Jewish life. In our first episode, we spoke with Jacob Feinspan about progressive activism on the left, given the rise and normalization of anti-Zionism and antisemitism. In our second episode, we discussed the difficulty but necessity of showing gratitude, even to flawed leaders, with Dr. Tamara Mann-Twiel. And in our third episode, we looked at the issue of Jewish pride and self-identity during these troubling times with Dr. Dan Held. Today, we're going to tackle another issue, cognitive dissonance for American Jews who are on the right. According to a Pew report in 2021, about 26% of American Jews identify as Republican, either because of their social or political perspectives as conservatives, or simply because they think the party is better for Israel, or some combination of the two. The same thing happened in terms of the numbers when it comes to voting for President Donald Trump. The numbers tell us that about 26% of American Jews voted for Donald Trump, which means this is not an insignificant number among American Jewry. And so what happens among conservatives, Jewish Republicans, who want some of the reform that the administration is offering, but they might not want all of it, or they might not want the specific ways that the administration are going through with it. For instance, immigration reform may be important to them, but the draconian measures of separating parents and children and some of the difficulties with due process is not something they were looking for. They may think that freedom of speech has really gone off the rails and needs to be relitigated, but they also want to protect democratic norms at the same time. And they may even have wanted a crackdown on universities for letting anti-Semitism fester. But again, they may be concerned that the way it's being done, cutting research funding in the name of sparing Jews, may give rise to some pushback or problems for Jews in the future. So what are Republican Jews to do? Who do they ally themselves with? Do they offer measured critiques? Do they feel that there are things that they're just not going to be able to negotiate for, especially as a minority? So I'm really excited today to talk to someone who is a principled social and political conservative, Rabbi Mark Gottlieb, because I think he's someone who's really thought deeply about these issues. Mark, thank you so much for joining.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Elana. I always enjoy our conversations, and I have to note that not only are you so thoughtful and intelligent, of course, and learned, scholarly, but you're also so funny. You've got such a great sense of humor.
Thank you very much.
It's always fun engaging with you, no matter what the topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Well, let me give people a little bit about your background, though I think many people know you already. Rabbi Mark Gottlieb is the Chief Education Officer of Tikvah and founding dean of the Tikvah Scholars Program. He has a storied career in day school leadership even before his Tikvah days, and I should tell you that he is sitting with us today as interim head of school for the Dr. Miriam and Sheldon G. Adelson School in Las Vegas, in addition to the work he's doing at Tikvah. But I think it's significant that Mark's work at the Tikvah Fund includes specifically trying to teach American Jews, young and old, about the viability of political conservatism from a Jewish standpoint. Recently, Mark participated in a year-long bipartisan civics project run between A More Perfect Union and the Hartman Institute. That project is specifically dedicated in a bipartisan way to strengthening American civic life and democracy in the face of so many challenges. But perhaps most importantly, Mark and I have known each other for over a decade, including when we get to daven or pray together down the block from my parents when I'm in town for Sukkot or the like. So, Mark, let's get started. We know that Torah is an anchor of this show. And today I want us to look at two rabbinic concepts that I think are kind of remarkable in their ability to tell us that sometimes we have to choose between things that we wish we could have it all. And sometimes we have to choose. Now, of course, these concepts are going to be talking about divine law, divine commandments, and how do you deal when two commandments conflict with each other. But I think we can abstract from it kind of a philosophical conversation about what we do when we can get some of our values and not all of our values out of certain choices. So can we start, even before we go into the first of the two concepts, can we just start with some values that you would put on the table as a principled conservative that are important to you?
Sure, Elana. So as a preface to any conversation about Judaism and politics, about religion and politics, I think it's critical to acknowledge that Judaism and any true religion transcends politics. In other words, you would never want to reduce Judaism to a particular political party, a political platform, a set of specific policy positions. That would be a category mistake because religion is such a comprehensive worldview. It's an all-encompassing worldview. It takes in all of life, the sacred and the mundane, politics, culture, leisure, economics, everything. And because of that foundational role, it's very dangerous to try and reduce Judaism to one particular position on any side of the political spectrum. And unfortunately, I think many religious people tend to invoke God and sacred scripture and their traditions to say that if you're a believing Jew, you must vote X or you must vote Y or you must hold to this position. And that's obviously problematic. That's not to say, of course, that the values and principles of Judaism can't be mined for the ethical and cultural and political insights that go into voting for a candidate or go into holding a particular political position. But by no means can they be coextensive or identified as exactly the same.
No, we don't want a cheapening of religion and what it is or reduction. And I think one of the things that is really difficult about American Jewish life right now is it feels like people's Judaism can be reduced often to their political platform. And that is so highly problematic. And I'm really glad that you started with it. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cheapening of religion, and it's also creating an untenable position for politics to try to do so much that it goes beyond its scope, beyond its true purview. So when politics is made into the be-all and end-all, that's when problems begin. In the revolutionary spirit, certainly overturning societies in the name of politics, in the name of a cause, in the name of revolution. I mean, we know throughout history, certainly in the modern period, that has happened, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, not the American Revolution, I would argue. But maybe that's another conversation. But yes, that's the
Well, can you give us just
danger.
A sentence on why not the American?
Yeah, that's because the American Revolution wasn't a total overturning of society. It was very much built on English common law and the traditions of the Anglo-Saxon peoples, religion, I would say Christianity, whereas the French and the Russian revolutions were total abrogations of the past. We're going to have a new calendar. We're going to erect a temple to reason. Those are sort of the things that happened in the French Revolution.
It's fair to say that an important value of yours as a conservative is not to be revolutionary, right?
Yes,
to maybe be evolutionary, incremental, traditional, right? That's an important value that you're describing
that, very much
that matters to you.
A conservative value. Of course, there are different interpretations of conservatism today. We're seeing so many different flavors and, MAGA and libertarian and Tea Party a decade or two ago.
It's not any one thing.
It's not monolithic. In fact, there's, I think, a lot of healthy diversity on the right. In some ways, I think more even than on the left. But be that as it may, whether you accept that or not, I think you're so correct in saying that revolution is anathema to conservatives.
Yeah. Is there another value you would want to put on the table before we get to the first concept?
Yeah, I mean, these are all related in a sort of a web of similar themes, but I often think of Edmund Burke, who for many is the father of modern conservatism, the great English statesman and defender of the American colonies. He would often talk about the little platoons in his most famous book, The Reflections on the Revolution in France. He would talk about those intermediate associations, those intermediate groups like the family, the church, the school, between the individual and the state, between these polar opposites in a society, the individual and the state writ large. There are all these intervening intermediary associations that really create the culture of a society and the culture of a conservative worldview. And I think that still animates the conservative world today.
Yeah. So,
even though in a world of digital communication, to maintain the integrity of these smaller associations is harder.
It's very important, and very difficult. Okay, so that's helpful. Let's see if those are some of the values that end up coming up when we talk about what we're balancing. Because the first concept that I want to offer is a concept where basically the rabbis see that you could have two goods, meaning two commandments that you're trying to follow, and they might actually conflict with each other. And what happens when they do, right? And to be clear, you want both, but you can't always have both. So here's how it goes. We have a rule of thumb that Reish Lakish offers us in the Talmud in Menachot. And I'm always careful to let people know that when you have a rule of thumb in the Talmud, you better believe that there's going to be a lot of conversation where you're going to get addenda to that rule. You're going to get exceptions to that rule. So don't go taking this and running with it as though this is where we're headed. But he does give us this rule where he says, Kol makom she'ata motzeh aseh velo ta'aseh. Anytime you find a commandment that's positive, as in do X, and a negative commandment, meaning don't do Y, if you can do both of them, if you can uphold both of them, that's great. That's exactly what you should do. But there might be a situation where they conflict. V'im lav, and if not, what do you do if they conflict? And I want to give people an example that some people interpret as following this rule in particular, an example of where they might conflict, right? A baby boy, a Jewish baby boy, is supposed to have his brit milah, his circumcision, on the 8th day. What if that 8th day falls out on Shabbat? So on Shabbat, we don't have non-urgent surgery on Shabbat. That's something that would violate Shabbat, right? It's a do not do. And yet we have this positive commandment of on the 8th day, specifically, you're supposed to circumcise. And in that situation, here's what Reish Lakish says. Yavo aseh, the positive commandment, in the example that I brought, giving a circumcision, comes v'yidche et lo ta'aseh. It pushes the negative commandment out of the way. It wins out, right? And this, just to unpack this for a minute, again, this is talking about divine commandments, and it's able to give you a rule of thumb. But I think in our lives, we feel a sense that sometimes we wish we could do this and that. We could have this value and that value, but we can't have it all. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how does this hit you, this concept, as somebody who clearly has certain values that you want and think that can be achieved through a Republican administration, and there may be some values that you want to achieve that
For the
can't
record,
be.
I'm an independent voter. I am not registered as a Republican. That's the
By the way,
spirit
you
of
heard it
Brett.
here first, everybody. No, I love that. Right. These are all, we're trying to give a little dimensionality.
Because conservatism, this is really important. Conservatism is not a rigid set of doctrines or policy positions or political platforms. It's a persuasion. It's an orientation. It's a kind of a worldview in its own. Before we talk about religion as a worldview, well, politics has its own set of worldview related items or perspectives. And I think conservatism has always been a space or a configuration of persuasion and orientation rather than stark, monolithic policy positions. And I think
That's
this
really
teaching
helpful.
of Chazal really fits into this in many ways.
Yeah, you're not a knee-jerk voter, right? You're not, what are the values you're getting out of it, and what are the values that are left behind, maybe because of this particular administration?
Sure. So I would say, and this is a teaching that a very wise mentor of mine shared with me years ago, and it's been confirmed over and over again, especially recently. Politics is not the choice between perfect and imperfect. It's the choice between better and worse. What that means is that in politics, we make choices all the time. but it's the choice between what's a better option and what's a less good option. It's not a choice between the perfect, the irreducibly benighted and perfect ideal, but something that is already built in with certain limitations and even flaws, perhaps. But it's the choice between better and worse. And one has to make a choice.
I just think it goes with what you said before about making sure that politics, you don't think politics is everything.
Is the be-all
This
and
is
the
of a
end-all.
piece.
Yes.
It's of a piece with that.
This is related to that because it's encouraging you to think about choices in a more granular way, in a more realistic way, in a more humble way, in a more modest way.
Yeah.
And in a way
and what are the values that you would say right now lead you down a particular path, and the values that I wish that was in our grasp, but it's not, and this is just a choice I have to make between this and that.
Right. So one value that I think every conservative cherishes is the value of tradition. Another quote, this is G.K. Chesterton, who was a Catholic convert, a literary giant in Edwardian England in the early 20th century. He would say that tradition is the democracy of the dead. That tradition, the idea of taking seriously the wisdom of one's ancestors, taking seriously the wisdom of the ages, is a form of democracy in that we let the ancients speak to us as much as the modern. Sometimes when we're only listening to our own voices, we're in an echo chamber. And which group, which political group, which religious group doesn't exist in an echo chamber? We all do.
Do you feel that this administration is putting forth some of the traditional thinking that you care about? What
and
are
I'll
some
tell you
of
one.
the...
Yes, so let me sort of play that out
just to
a
get
little
brass
bit.
tacks for people to understand.
Yes, happy to. So you mentioned the issue of immigration. There's the question of illegal immigration, and there's the question of legal immigration. I think illegal immigration, one would think, could be a bipartisan issue. In other words, to lower the number of illegal immigrants that are breaking the law to come into the United States. Obviously, there are exceptions for, asylum and there are, but there has to be some way of getting a hold of the law and getting a hold of what's ordered liberty and what's breaking the law, and what's breaking the law often to the detriment of the citizens that reside in this country, without being hysterical and without going on, in rhetorically high-handed ways about all the crimes that are committed by illegal. I don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. I think it happens, but there are many legal citizens that commit crimes, but they're citizens and they have a right to exist and to live in this country, as opposed to people that break the law to come into the country.
Okay, so that's really interesting. You're basically saying, I want to go back to a traditional way of thinking that there's such a thing as illegal immigration and legal immigration, right? Now, we're going to go back. We're going to talk about the draconian measure that the Trump administration is using here. We're going to get there. Is it worth it? But for a minute, is there another value?
And draconian, obviously draconian is a term which I'm happy to talk through with you. It's always in the eyes of the beholder. In other words, what's one person's draconian measures could be someone else's safety and security measures. But obviously, when you see children ripped out of hands and their parents' bosoms, those are painful to see. But one also has to, even in that case, Elana, separate out sort of the emotion that we feel upon any human being with a heart, seeing something like that. And, well, what's happening when you zoom out in terms of legal, illegal, the rights of the child, the rights of the parent, what rights can we talk about with illegal aliens?
Well, so this is very interesting because in some ways what you're offering is, here are the two values that I would love to see. One is that I would love to see the traditionalism of being able to see the difference between illegal immigration and legal immigration. And another is I would love to see a rhetoric that speaks about all people in an honest way and in a kind way and in a dignified way, right?
Sure.
Again, I would love to see the immigration stuff reformed, and I would love to see a care and concern for individuals and how it's gone about.
Sure.
But it also seems like when it comes to the balance between getting the big picture right and the little pictures of people who end up suffering as a result, it seems like on balance, you're going for the big picture. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes. It's
right?
a fair thing
on
to say.
On balance, you're going for that. It's a fair thing to say.
With that sense of choosing and the pain of some choices. In other words,
yeah, of course.
Choosing means you're choosing better versus worse, but it doesn't mean that the choice that you haven't made doesn't come with its own merits or virtues or things that compel you, but you have to make a choice.
Okay, so this is really interesting because then I do want to bring in the second concept, the second rabbinic concept, because the second rabbinic concept is a collateral damage concept, which is sometimes the collateral damage is just too great, right? We have this concept of mitzvah haba'a ba'avera, doing a positive commandment. And again, we're talking about divine commands, but I'm abstracting it to think, right? Doing the commandment, but in order to get there, you have to do something that's transgressive. And that's a no-go. Now, how that jives with the first concept, I leave that to many commentators who have spilled ink on that question. But the point is here, there's a dirty hands problem. And so I want to present to you thinking about dirty hands, because that's what it is, right? Meaning I know dirty hands is a concept we usually use about leaders, but I think I love this language of spattered hands that I saw recently about people who vote for leaders who do certain things, like our hands are spattered.
Spattered or splattered?
To dirty hands. I think it was spattered, but I think you could say splattered also.
Now I'm thinking some horror film with some knife-wielding maniac.
We could change the genre of this whole show right now, Mark.
Some people might say that we're talking about a horror review and just talking about, politics and the administration, baby.
I didn't say it. But I think that there are three approaches generally to dirty hands, okay? One is like a Machiavellian, ends justify the means. I'm sorry, or I'm not even sorry. It's not wrong. It's the right thing. The ends justify the means. This is what needs to be done, right? A second is you should feel the pain of what you've done wrong, right? You had to do it, but you feel the pain of what you've done wrong, which it sounds like you were kind of saying, or not what you've done wrong, but the pain of what wrongs may be committed.
Sure.
But there's a third, which is you have to do penance for it. Even if you did it for all the right reasons, you look at it and you say, oh, yeah, no, that was a problem. I have to do penance for it. Now, what does doing penance look like? Okay, so in the ancient world, penance means you'd give a korban, you'd give a sacrifice. But I'm saying in the modern world, it means you got to do something to stop it or to engage it in some way. And I'm wondering what you think about that. Meaning, yes, there's pain, but what if, is there something we can do to stop it, to lobby it, to change it?
Yeah, well, I love the fact you've used this word, you've invoked this term penance.
Yeah.
Penance in the modern world is a performative act of contrition, sometimes sincere, sometimes more mixed, but it's one of the features of our contemporary culture, overplayed and overused and losing a lot of the
now we're getting somewhere.
Authenticity and integrity in the process. Obviously, when one commits a genuine sin, the Torah and other forms of religion demand penance. There's no question about that. But I think we have to define our terms, and I think it was good that you put a little qualifier, a little contingency on your definition of this concept of mitzvah haba ba'avera. This is a very specific halachic category. Now, it's wonderful to abstract from it.
You can't use a stolen lulav.
Yeah, you can't use a stolen lulav. But, we're humans and moral creatures to the degree that we are moral creatures. We want to abstract values and lessons from this halachic data. And so we say, well, the ends never justify the means. Having the lulav on Sukkot doesn't justify you've stolen it from somebody, and that's always going to be a problem. I think in many of these political questions that we're touching on, it's not clear objectively as it is in the halachic world where, this is a mitzvah, this is an avera, this is a command, this is a positive command, this is a negative prohibition. It's not like that at all. In other words, even the most extreme cases where, we've used this image of the ICE agents ripping a child from the hands of the mother or father. Well, what would you want them to do in the case where they're illegal immigrants? They don't have a right to be in this country right now. You're not going to put the parents and the children in the same place to detain them before you get a sense of who are these people? Can we be lenient? Can we grant asylum? Can we do something? It's just the images. We live in a world of images and the superficiality of images. I'm not saying that these are not painful things.
This might be very hard for people to listen to, what they just heard. I just want to name that it might be hard for people to, right? Like, it's just important to name that.
Sure.
I think my question is, if you actually think that pulling a child from their parents is problematic, then is there some responsibility, even if you think immigration reform is important, is there some responsibility to look into whether there's a different kind of clemency in a situation like that, right?
Yes.
As opposed to being a sledgehammer, do we need to be a little bit more surgical if we think that there truly are problems, right? Meaning, as opposed to saying, look, unfortunately, I'm not sure what I would do. I would say, even as somebody who supports the administration and supports immigration reform, I would wonder if there is a responsibility to say, maybe the same way we have exceptions in Jewish law, right, in certain situations, and the same way we can try to figure out ways to finesse or ways to change the experience to make it, again, a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. I would say that's where the dirty hands concept would say to me, you got to work on that. That's what I feel. But
I think that's
would
great.
You
and you
agree with
formulated
that?
it
Are
well.
you comfortable with that? Or,
yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with it
and
in
it's okay
theory.
if that's not you, but I'm laying out what people could do with their cognitive dissonance.
Let me give you a great example of conservatives who are trying to wage that kind of campaign, the one that you've just described, of the more what you're calling surgical as opposed to the sledgehammer. There's a wonderful book written by Jonathan Rauch. Jonathan Rauch is a man of the left. The book is called Cross Purposes. It actually came up a number of times in our workshop that you referenced, A More Perfect Union Hartman workshop on Jewish civics, because it was such a valuable resource. And he chronicles the work of the Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints on these issues. And there are conservative Catholics that are also fighting for reform for some of these more extreme manifestations of immigration reform. And they are conservatives. And I think that's just yet another sort of example on conservative values, the family. In other words, a conservative value for many conservatives, the family and the integrity and the family. Centrality of the family is traditionally understood, yes, but the family is such a centerpiece that these actions by immigration officers or the administration
to break up
families seems to counteract another conservative principle, namely the integrity of the family. So, within the conservative movement, there are differences of perspective and opinion and orientation and emphases that allows for this kind of rich conversation that we're having now and that is being had within the conservative movement.
This is exactly why it was important for me to have somebody from the left on at the beginning of this series and someone from the right on, because I think people actually want to know, what do you do when there is a conflict? And how do you manage such a thing? And what you're describing is that there are some people who are trying to manage that kind of thing.
Yes, who are trying to manage that conflict.
I love the fact that you're not a one-issue voter. A lot of people are one-issue voters, and they're sort of like, okay, I'm a one-issue voter, and therefore, if my issue is Israel, I'm going for the... Do you think that there's daylight between what's good for the Jews and what's good for America right now? When you think about the politics going on, do you think there's daylight? Have you ever thought there's daylight?
You know what? I used to think there was daylight, honestly, especially on the foreign relations, international affairs angle. When I was younger, I don't know how many years ago that was, but whenever it was,
just yesterday.
Well, yeah, just yesterday.
Well, you're what? You're what? 29. You're 29 anyway. You're 29.
Young in spirit.
That's right.
I used to be more receptive or open or sympathetic even to some of the, what we would call today, neo-isolationist positions that...
From an American standpoint, you're saying?
From an American standpoint, to say that there's an American foreign policy set of strategic interests, and they do align in some ways with Israel, but not always, and not necessarily. And the truth is, I have moved in the past decade plus away from that position because I just see the world today as a place that's playing out a civilizational conflict between the West and many elements of the rest of the world. And I see Israel and America shoulder to shoulder in this battle for the West. And so I've seen in my own evolution on this question, I've seen an acknowledgement that Israel's strategic interests, certainly military and geopolitical, are really aligned with America's and America's with Israel, because I see what we're engaging now mostly against radical Islam, although that's maybe beginning to change. And certainly the past 6 months have been a great expression of some Western victories. But this is the long game. Nobody should be mistaken to think that this is a short game and that some powerful victories over the past few months are going to be the end of the story. Yeah.
Just study history.
Just study history.
It doesn't.
Exactly.
I mean, my obsession right now with Churchill and Stalin, there needs to come together during World War II, and then how that catapulted Stalin into power after. I mean, it's just these chess pieces are just constantly moving. And you're just talking about a seven-headed monster where you're hitting the heads and then they grow back. And God forbid, but they're trying to grow back already.
Yeah. Samuel Huntington controversially laid out this claim of a clash of civilizations. I think he was really onto something in talking about patterns of societies and civilizations that lend itself to long conflicts, to historic conflicts, to millennia-long conflicts. And I think that's, to me, why Israel and America are so vital for each other. Whereas, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, my American patriotism created some daylight between Israel. But I was wrong.
But I think evolving in your thinking is fascinating. I wonder what you'll say 20 years hence. Maybe not about this, maybe about something else. So let's dig in a little bit, because there definitely is anti-Semitism on the right.
Yes. And
there's definitely isolationism on the right. I mean, I think Elon Musk, I know he's out of the government now. I think that was a Heil. I think that was a Sieg Heil.
I don't think it was.
You don't, but that's fine. But no, we can disagree about that. But
sure.
I am wondering.
Yeah, that's like a footnote. I'm more worried about Tucker. I'm more worried about Tucker Carlson right now.
Yeah. So what do you think, as a Jewish conservative, what do you do about that? Right?
Well,
what's the recourse? It's strengthening a different kind of moderate conservative. What do you think?
I think that a lot of the backlash or the vitriol that we're seeing from what we'll call the anti-Semitic right has a lot to do with views of Judaism and Christianity, actually.
Huh.
Yeah, I think that Candace Owens is maybe the most obvious example of this. I think Candace Owens has become a traditionalist Catholic over the past 4 or 5 years. She married a fellow who was a traditionalist Catholic. When I say traditionalist, I mean people that really reject the changes of Vatican II.
Yeah.
And included in those changes are views on secessionism and supersessionism, rather, and anti-Semitism. And I think that Candace's views on Israel have evolved, but evolved in the wrong direction, largely because she sees Judaism in a more negative light than she ought to. Wow. I mean, that I would argue she ought to. And that has fed her more...
I would argue that too.
Yeah. I mean, but I think it's a pattern.
But
I think it could be Tucker also at some level.
But what's crazy right now is that you have the secular version of that.
Oh, of course.
On the left.
Sure.
And then you have the good old Christian anti-Semitism on the right. It's a very difficult moment. So I think I want to end with this question, if you're okay with it. How important do you think bipartisanship is right now, given threats to democracy, given anti-Semitism on both sides, right? Given some of the, revolutionary forces? How important do you think bipartisanship is? Like, what do you think the role is?
I'm fond of a quote from C.S. Lewis that he said once, that the socialist that doesn't read the Church Times and the clergyman who doesn't read the Fabian News, which is a socialist H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw publication, fundamentally they're missing something. And I think what he meant by that is that we need to understand the viewpoints of our rivals Even more, we have to find opportunities to make enemies into friends. And we have to make people that we don't agree with on everything, we have to see their humanity and they have to see our humanity. And when that happens, there's better results. Yeah. There's not the utopia of every, Shangri-La, Kumbaya, everybody getting together and agreeing. But there's certainly more of a chance, at least a chance, for people to see that humanity in the other and to be empathetic and grant the other person some insight and some validity and some perspective that maybe they're missing. And I think obviously that goes both ways. So if bipartisanship means that, then I'm all for it. If bipartisanship means just the political proceduralism of, getting votes for a bill or, supporting a platform, I'm okay with that. I'm less excited by that because that seems like just politics as usual. Yeah. When it gets to the tough questions, then there won't be the consensus. Then there'll be the traditional lines of argumentation.
Yeah. This conversation has actually been an example of how do you talk about tough issues and be honest that people actually have somewhere that they're coming from, a commitment that they're coming from. Nobody's doing the cheap thing here and saying, well, President Trump was convicted of rape, and therefore, how could you? First of all, yes, that's a terrible thing. I know you think that's a terrible thing too. Well, but I'm not giving you a gotcha. It's a how do you
unless you just did.
Reconcile
No,
I think it's important. I think it's important to mention, but that's not the totality of what people are deciding based upon. And for different people, it occupies a different, the Hebrew that I'm thinking about is seder hadifuyot, your list of priorities in terms of what you're looking for.
Triaging.
For different people, it's, there's a triaging, and that can make people uncomfortable, but it's honest to actually talk about those things. So I want to thank you so much, not only by starting by saying that Torah and politics are not the same, but by actually also showing people that on your side of the aisle, so to speak, there are lots of different opinions, and that's not the totality of who we are either, or who you are either as a conservative, and that it's important for us to be, I'm going to say, the Jewish people, right?
The Jewish people.
It's important for us to be the Jewish people and to be together. So thank you for giving us a real three-dimensional view. Appreciate you so much.
My pleasure. It's great to talk with you always, Elana.
Thanks for listening to our show, and special thanks to Elana's Chabruta this week, Rabbi Mark Gottlieb. That concludes our special series of Texting. It was produced by me, M. Lewis Gordon, with assistance from Gabe Schertzer and Annie Beyer-Shafitz. It was edited and mixed by Josh Allen, who also edited our video. Our video producer is Daniel Goodman. Maytal Friedman is our executive producer, and our theme music is by Luke Allen. For more ideas from the Shalom Hartman Institute, you can sign up for our newsletter in the show notes and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can watch the video versions of our show on YouTube. The link is in the show notes where you can subscribe to our channel and share it. We are planning future episodes of Texting IRL for later this year. So, as always, if you have a topic you'd like to hear about or you have comments about this episode, we would love to hear them. You can send an email to texting@shalomhartman.org. Until then, thanks for listening.